Hi there. In this video, I wanted to talk about a concept that I had been sharing with a friend of mine. A friend of mine and myself would have these wonderful spiritual talks, and among many, one of them would be about the dark night of the moon. So, the dark night of the moon is a central metaphor. It's a hidden phase where light is absent, clarity is deferred, and you have to navigate by intuition, memory, and trust that light will return. It's understood as a spiritual stage and a political awakening, where the light of conventional optimism is obscured, forcing you to confront the deeper structures of reality at play. So, I'm not sure about you, but to take this into personal context, have you ever had moments where, your life has just flipped under your feet, and at that moment, all you have is fragments? Say somebody dies, or you lose your job, or you're in an abusive relationship with somebody who you've built a life with for years. At this moment, you might have experienced a dark night of the moon, a moment where everything you thought held you down in the world kind of just lifts up without any warning. And for me, I suppose this dark night of the moon happened when um, I was learning about the division between the global north and the global south. So, in my story of this dark night, it wasn't like a day or a month or even a year. It was a decade or more of depression, of loss, of confusion, of suffering, of insanity, of fear, of learning. It was extremely painful. And I'm not saying I'm done in any way, but I've made a lot of progress when it comes to how I'm able to move outside of this part of my life towards the next step. So, when I started to learn about what imperialism, neocolonialism, white supremacy, capitalism, racism, sexism, heteronormativity, heteropatriarchy, cis heteropatriarchy. When I first heard these words, I really didn't have much context to be able to hold on to these ideas. All I had was my friend's story. So, as I moved into Vancouver at that time, I met some people in my life from the global south. So, these people, very wonderful people, very, caring people, had told me the stories about the division and the struggles and the violence that they experienced, the inequity that they experienced working their way through the Western liberal meritocratic promise of upward mobility. And the story didn't add up. It didn't add up in the way that I thought it was adding up for almost everybody. And once I heard it from the lived experience of somebody growing up outside of the metropole, outside of the global north, outside of the rich countries, outside of of wealth, then I broke down. I couldn't handle it. I collapsed mentally. I lost it. Um, and I wanted to know more. I wanted to know why. As somebody who identifies as Métis, um, who holds family members who identify as indigenous, but also working class as well, um, I felt it was important for me to understand what violence, betrayal, dispossession, confusion was done in this world to my friends and to my family, and began my journey, I suppose, into this dark stage of my life. So after this depression, I lost pretty much everything in one way. I became so invested in a desire or need to do something with this life that was so much beyond just being another, you know, producer for the economy in the entertainment industry, that I wanted something like a desire to make change in this world happen, because I knew in my heart, even if I didn't have the knowledge at that time, that the story was true. There was something really wrong with this world. And you can already see it. We already have all of the information, and enough information without all of the complex details and research in the textbooks and theory that we have. Our clothes, especially if you come from the core, our clothes made in China, made in Vietnam, made in these developing countries, our friends holding these stories, the disparities of wealth between often the white, rich, and the poor, colored, disparities between men and women. Small things add up in our lives, and eventually, I suppose for me, the deeper truth came up when I was shortly in my first job, and yeah, like I said, I lost it. It was insane. It was too much for me. I couldn't handle how brutal the world was, and how it was a story was being told through liberal democracy that opportunity was something progressively getting better for everybody. And that if all actors in this globalized world are able to hold up to the stories and fantasies of upward mobility and progress, eventually they'll be able to achieve the wealth and abundance that the rich countries carry. But of course, this is a lie. It's not something that is supposed to be shared. The system needs exploitation. The system needs somebody to ensure that cheap labor, cheap goods are being produced for the majority, or for at least the rich or rich countries. Now, I'm not saying this is a completely depressive stance. There is possibility that at an eventual point, capitalism might sort of shift into a new, I suppose, megastructure of economic and commerce exchange, and be able to acknowledge its tendency of unethical activity, but not at this point in history. So, for me, after I had learned this, I decided, okay, I'm gonna read books. So I took most of my time and I read things from Karl Marx. So from Karl Marx, I started to have a, I read the Communist Manifesto and I started to have a better idea about class disparity. But, Karl Marx is very complicated and it takes a lot of time for people to actually understand him. Um, I learned about neoliberalism. So, not to get too much into it, but neoliberalism was a set of social, economic, political um, policies that would restructure the world and maintain a sort of economic and political supremacy within the global north countries and take um, violent, brutal, extractive, post colonial um, resources from the global south and restructure the world into a story of progressivism and human rights while also requiring these developing countries to be parasitically exploited um, until the fantasy, which was never going to be realized, um, was completed. So, yeah, these books, they would often help give me better guideposts to understand the disparities. But when I actually went to Vietnam, um, it was, I lost my job. I lost so much when I I found out about this and I started to understand I wanted to do something about this. And I realized that, I wanted to be an activist and that's what I tried to do. But, you know, it, it's so much more complicated than just becoming an activist. And politically, when we're talking about identity politics, there's so much complication when it comes to how to perform activism and even its effectiveness. So that project never worked out for me, and I lost so much of, I learned and yet lost so much through this attempt at doing a social good. So I kind of gave up in a way. I mean, I was so afraid at that time, just learning and knowing what I did at that point and accumulating knowledge, that I decided, okay, I'm going to go to Vietnam. On one end, yes, for respite, because I had nothing. And in, the Western, I suppose, marketplace, particularly with parasitic rent seeking and ridiculous rent costs, property costs, I had no chance or very little chance of recovering from what had happened to me as a working class um, um, person with class struggle throughout my family. So I went there, but holding that knowledge that I did about Vietnam, it was horrible. I mean, if I went there without that knowledge, it might have been okay. I kind of could just live within the sort of liberal fantasies and hold the idea of my superiority as a Westerner here to educate these people about English and social practices and human rights. But obviously, at that point, it was not going to happen. I was too educated to be able to hold that lens. So I knew in some way this project was a relatively neocolonial imperialist form of exploitation. Um, but also, whatever, they're learning a language and they're connecting. Vietnamese are connecting with the global conversation. So, but there was a deep, deep, dark, you know, reality that I was fighting against with this experience. So, I mean, at one point I thought, okay, maybe what I can do in this moment is I could learn Vietnamese as a sort of social justice act. And I mean, it was horrible. It was horrible because Vietnamese is so difficult. Vietnamese is absolutely painfully difficult and so unlike English. So, I guess what I could really understand from that experience, and I'm still in it, is that, oh my God, I have so much compassion and empathy for Vietnamese people learning English because it is in no way similar to English in any sense, completely different vocabulary, and mostly sharing connection with French in a very slight way. So I was just brutally murdering myself through this process of learning this impossible language, and yeah, it was dreadful. But I'm still learning, and as you get better with it, it improves. But this was it still kept me in my depression. Um, but along the way, I kept reading more theory. I started to better grasp what capitalism meant and what these neoliberalism meant. I was able to better attach ideas together and concretize some of the theory with practical reality through also ChatGPT. So ChatGPT was a really great anchor to support my capacity to separate, you know, projects of progress at a local, national level within the global south from global progressivism and neo-imperialism and colonialism. So that was super helpful when the books or the resources weren't there to support those ideas. Um, but yeah, just got darker and darker sometimes. I started to learn about the poverty there and how poverty was both a product of the communist failure, but also the tendencies of um, distortion in the political sphere of the Vietnam, um, in correlation with the global north and its demands and requirements of um, progress and development, and adjustments that were parasitic and unfair and required the continuous exploitation of the global south to maintain its benefits and privileges at the very top. So when we think about those benefits, when we think about our health care up north, when we think about our infrastructure, when we think about our basic needs and fighting for the rights of workers at the lower classes, a lot of those basic needs and privileges are granted from the exploitation of those in the global south. We could have never had the opportunity or the capacity to build unions or fight for our rights or possibly even hold a democratic stage without a form of exploitation in the global south. And once those pieces start to add up, I mean, it becomes insanity in so many ways. So, um, once I actually things started to add up even more, and I think I got to a point. I've gotten to many points where I just couldn't handle it anymore, and it became too much for me. But things started to slow down recently, where I've been able to kind of. I was reading Slavoj Zizek, and he kind of allowed me to kind of hold less, emotional charge. Understand that outside of the dynamic of imperialist neocolonial capitalism, that things were always complicated. There was never going to be an opportunity to see things eye to eye for any human being in the world. But that doesn't erase the fact that we still need to restructure the world in a way that allows humanity to survive, if that's going to be a possibility. So I guess this video is just a record of my dark night of the moon. And I know these videos are long, but yeah, that's what they are, I guess. Thank you.